Well, welcome to June, which every year now is celebrated as Pride Month. So today I want to tell you the story of the town that celebrated Pride. Let's be clear, God loves everybody, even sinners, because that's the only people that he has to love. We're all sinners. Let's be clear, everybody deserves respect. Everybody deserves to be seen and treated as made in the image of God. Everybody deserves for us to love them. Jesus said that we are to love our enemies. And the idea is, if you're going to love your enemies, who does that not include? You got to love everybody. In other words, love the people that are easy to love the people that are difficult for you to love as well. However, living in 2024, especially this month, but throughout the year, we are bombarded with messages constantly telling us good is evil, evil is good. Good is evil, evil is good. Good is evil, evil is good. And never more so when it comes to issues like homosexual activity. So I think it's good just to take a few moments to tell the story of the Bible. The first time we see homosexual activity dealt with by God. Now, no two words are more associated with sin and evil in the Bible than the words Sodom and Gomorrah. Over and over in the Bible. In fact, if somebody wants to point out like the epitome of evil, Sodom and Gomorrah is the example. Prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul refers to Sodom and Gomorrah. John in the book of Revelation talks about the evil of Sodom and Gomorrah. They all use these as examples of, if you want to think about evil, the capital city of evil, you're talking about the sister cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus condemns a town for not listening to him. And to make the point of just how wicked that town is not listening to him, Jesus says, truly I tell you, it'll be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. I mean, if there's one town, if there's one place Jesus is saying, if you're worse than this, you are awful. He goes to Sodom and Gomorrah. During Pride Month, it may be tempting to minimize how homosexual activity breaks God's heart. It's interesting the degradation that has taken place through the past 10, 15 years. It's predictable. Alexander Pope had the great little ditty, "Vice is a monster of so frightful mean as to be hated, need to be seen, need but be seen. Yet seen too oft, familiar with her face, we first endure, then pity, then embrace." And that certainly is what's happened with homosexual activity and transgender and people with gender confusions. We first endured, let's tolerate, then we pitied. And now there's full embracing. In June, we're going to see 30 days of homosexual sin celebrated. Easy to compromise, easy to embrace. With that in mind, let's turn to Genesis 19 and think a little bit about Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 19:1 says, 2 angels entered Sodom in that evening as Lot was sitting in Sodom's gateway. Who is Lot? Lot is the nephew of Abraham. At one point, Abraham's shepherds and Lot's shepherds were bickering, so Lot went to the plain area towards Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham stayed distinct. Now we find Abraham. The next thing we saw was Lot was living near Sodom and Gomorrah. Now he's living in Sodom at this point. We see 2 angels. We're not told at this point if Lot recognizes whether or not they're angels. The New Testament book of Hebrews mentions that there are times when people sometimes entertain angels not being aware that they're angels. And many people wonder if the Hebrew writer is actually referring to this account where Lot entertained these, he took care of these angels, but he didn't realize they were angels at the time. He meets them. They're probably carrying about them an air of righteousness that most people don't have, or probably in a way that nobody does, in a good way. And Lot knows they're in trouble. We see Lot sitting at the city gate. Now, ancient gates in ancient times were more than just metal doors on hinges that kind of closed. And a gate was an entire structure. Some gates were huge. In fact, since the gate was the weak point at the wall around a city, the walls protected the city from enemy attack, and the gate would be the weak point, they would make gates in an L shape, for instance, or maybe a Z shape even, so that if an army came in, an army couldn't just come in straight in. They would have to come in and turn again, and that way the army would be more vulnerable on the way in. So, and then they would have rooms in the gate, in the city gate, and those rooms are where the leaders of the city would sit, and they would make decisions. They would decide who's allowed to come to the city and who can't. They would make judicial decisions. We see in the book of Ruth, for instance, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it, but the kinsman redeemer who is entitled to marry Ruth says, I don't want to take responsibility for her. Boaz says, I do want to marry her. There's a transaction, a contract that is signed essentially, and it's at the city gate. It's just an example of what we're talking about. So Lot is sitting at the gate, which tells us he is an elder in the city. He has achieved a level of respect, acceptance in Sodom. He's conducted himself in a way that the people of Sodom aren't saying, we don't like this guy. They've embraced Lot, unfortunately, because I think that he's embraced them more than he should have. At first, so now Lot is here sitting at the gate. 2 Peter chapter 2, by the way, tells us that Lot's soul was tortured by the wickedness of Sodom. But his actions here tell us that he also worked to fit into Sodom. We're going to see that now. Whenever Lot stands up to evil, nobody's going to take him seriously because he's lost his credibility. Verse 1 continues. When Lot saw them, he got up to meet them. He bowed with his face to the ground, and he said, my lords, turn aside to your servant. That's why they carried about themselves a sense of righteousness. He knew these were holy men. My lords, turn aside to your servant's house, wash your feet, and spend the night. Then you can get up early and go on your way. No, they said, we will rather spend the night in the square. But Lot urged them so strongly that they followed him and went into the house. He prepared a feast and baked unleavened bread for them, and they ate. Again, ancient Near Eastern culture here is known for its hospitality. It's known for hospitality today. It's known for hospitality in those days. It was a great disgrace not to treat strangers well. So Lot's hospitality here does not surprise us. His forcefulness does, though. You know, they say that maybe they're feigning that they're going to go ahead and stay in the town square, but Lot knows what's going to happen to them if they're in the town square. Lot knows how wicked the people of this town are. Verse 3 says, so he urged them strongly that they follow him, and they went into the house. Again, it conveys this idea of Lot saying to them, you are in grave danger if you stay out here. You got to get off the street quickly. In other words, Lot's lived long enough in Sodom to know the reality. Verse 4. But when they went to bed, the men of the city of Sodom, both young and old, the whole population surrounded the house. They called out to Lot and said, where are the men who came to you tonight? Send them out to us so we can have sex with them. Several things to notice here. First of all, notice the overwhelming pervasiveness of evil in Sodom. The words here are chosen carefully. The whole population surrounded the house. Now, does that mean every man, woman, and child showed up? I don't know if literally that's true, but the idea is the whole city was in on it. Everybody knew what was going on, both young and old. Again, you get the idea here that homosexuality was not just tolerated in Sodom, it had been completely normalized. So much so that when the crowds surround the house and say, essentially, we want to rape this man, nobody says, that's wrong. Nobody says, wait, we shouldn't do this. Everybody, I think, has come to the place of understanding it is expected in Sodom. Some people may not like it still, who knows? It's kind of like crime in major cities today in some way, perhaps. Criminals know they're not going to be prosecuted. Criminals know they're being tolerated. And so crime runs rampant. It's not that everybody likes it, but everybody knows, hey, this is just how it is. It is so prevalent and strong, you just can't stop it, is how it was. For 4,000 years, there wasn't much controversy about how wicked the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were and why God destroyed it. But in recent years, some people have begun to downplay the sin of some homosexual activity by saying the sin here isn't really homosexuality, it's rape. Some, in fact, go so far as to misuse Ezekiel 16 to justify their beliefs. Ezekiel 16:49. Now this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. So the people of Israel are about to be destroyed by God. Ezekiel the prophet is telling them it's going to happen. And he's explaining to them in advance why. And what he does now is he says, the sins that you're about to be destroyed for were the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why God destroyed them. She and her daughters had pride, plenty of food, comfortable security, but didn't support the poor and the needy. They were haughty and did detestable acts before me, so I removed them when I saw this. Now, again, first of all, it's not hard to see the parallels between that day, their sinfulness, and our day, right? Pride, plenty of food, comfortable security, didn't care for the weakest among them, were haughty and did detestable acts before the God. Second, it's important also to be aware because of how this might be, if you're not aware of it, how people might use this to bamboozle you into believing that homosexuality is approved by, wasn't really the big deal. But understand a couple things. First of all, God, when people say God didn't destroy homosexuality for, didn't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for homosexuality, first of all, realize Ezekiel here is not giving an exhaustive list of Sodom's sins. He's telling the people, these are the sins of Sodom that are also the sins that you committed. So it doesn't have to say, it doesn't, just because it's not listed with the sins, if it weren't listed with the sins of Israel, doesn't mean that it wasn't the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. Second, though, note the phrase in verse 50 that they committed detestable acts, or they committed abominations. Often when people try to misuse this passage, they'll conveniently leave out verse 50. Understand, when people belittle homosexuality and they say, well, it's just a cultural thing. If the Bible were being written today, it would really be okay. Understand, they're taking that list of 4 things in the Old Testament, and are they also going to say, well, profaning God's name, that's a cultural thing. Having sex with animals, that's a cultural thing. No. At least at this point, they're not, but they go out of that whole list and they'll just kind of cherry pick. Oh, those are cultural, but this one, those are really bad, but this one isn't bad anymore. One popular argument for people to use to legitimize homosexual conduct is to say, if God gave me these desires, they can't be wrong. I mean, how cruel would God be to give me desires that he then condemns? But the Bible's filled with examples of people who acted out on inner desires that were inner desires that were strong. But God didn't bless. Cain killed Abel because he had a strong inner urge. Abraham slept with Hagar because he had a strong inner urge. God made him that way. Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery because they had this strong inner urge that this is what they ought to do. David slept with Bathsheba. I mean, the list goes on and on and on with people who did stuff because there was an inner urge that told them this is the right thing to do at this moment. Does anybody argue that what they did was right or what they did was God's fault because God made them and therefore the desire must be from God and must be legitimized?